Hello, 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 wherever you are in the world. My name is Emily with Change Light. I'm the creator of the Change Light system and changelight.world. And welcome to Inner Work for Greater Good, where we focus on the inner work that is required to fully show up in your brightest, most incredible self. And that by doing so, you change the world. Just by your mere presence, you can change the world. But also, if you have a mission that you know that you're here to fulfill, this is what we talk about. What's the inner work that we need to do in order to maximize our ability to make that difference in the world that we know that we're here to make? As I always say, so many of us change makers, so many of us impacted, mission-driven people are held back consciously and unconsciously by those inner insecurities, by those things that lurk in that darkness inside, or in that darkness inside, wherever you want to, wherever you feel it, but that carry those parts that really do get in the way, whether we are aware of it or not, that really do get in the way of us making a true difference and really shining the brightest light. As you may know, if you've seen previous episodes, or if you haven't, go watch them. But so much of our light, of our actual inner light, when we talk about the thing that enables us to just radiate. I mean, you've seen those people who glow. You've probably felt like you glow at times in your life. Well, that inner light, so much of that is stuck in our inner darkness. And then we bring that darkness back to light, discover its truth, and discover the power that it holds for us. And then really learn, and this is what I teach in my work in an online community, about how to draw out that darkness, bring it back to light, and then honor that light in such a way that it fully supports you in being the fullest, most optimal, brightest, most radiant, beautiful self, because you are bright and beautiful and radiant and fabulous. And so my job and my passion and my love is to help truly discover the light that is within you, whether you even realize it or not. I actually have to say, I was working with a client yesterday, and it was so darling because we were just doing an hour-long follow-up call. And this thing sort of showed up from her subconscious, and she's like, I'm not really sure where this is going. And that ultimately where it went was really for her to discover, like, I guess I do have a lot of joy inside of me. I guess I do have a lot of playfulness inside of me. And it's like, yes, you do. That's where this led. And so it's just whatever it is, we are all divinely designed to live our truth and to be our fullest presence. And so that's all in there. So with this wonderful, wonderful discovery of all of the greatness inside of you. So I just love being a part of your journey, and I'm so glad you're here to listen and to learn. And if you want to ask any questions, feel free to send me an email, emily@changelight.world. Okay, so that was kind of a long intro. But today's topic has to do mostly with basically some of the challenges that we face in relationships. And we all have, and I don't mean just romantic, I mean any kind of interactions with other human beings. Oftentimes when we're interacting with other human beings, what can happen is we're not really fully interacting with their true selves. We might actually be interacting with their subconscious biases, their subconscious wounds, their pain body, as Eckhart Tolle likes to call it, inner triggers, blocks. And so as much as we want to really be, or I personally do, but I really, and my desire is that we do this, is that when we interact with each other, we're interacting with one another's true selves, not the masks, not the blocks, not the armor. But sometimes what happens, though, is that we do end up interacting with those parts that aren't a true reflection of who they are. And so what can happen is, and then that can trigger stuff within us, or maybe we come into the interaction with, from our place of our masks or our wounds or our, or with blind spots or our biases. And so what ends up happening is it's like you have, this person's stuff showing up with this person's stuff, or this person showing up with their stuff, and then we react to their stuff. And so the point is that in human interactions, when, let's say, someone gets upset or someone has an extreme reaction, or, we're sort of like, what is going on here? Is that it's important to ask ourselves what's ours and what's theirs. And the reason why I bring this up as a topic is because I love my clients, and I have another client, where this came up when I thought, this would be a good thing to talk about in an episode, because she has been learning, without revealing her story because that's confidential, she has really been learning to start to recognize when she's taking more responsibility for other people's emotions or their responsibilities or their reactions, when she is unconsciously taking responsibility for their stuff, when really it's not her job and it's not her responsibility. And that also a lot of her reasons why she does do that comes from childhood. Usually that's most of the time where it comes from. It can also come from if we've been in a relationship with someone who's very toxic, but who was very manipulative so that we didn't realize how toxic it was. So for example, someone who's may have narcissistic personality disorder, and that no matter how much we showed up with our own health and our own, healthy boundaries or what have you, that instead, there are sometimes really toxic people who end up violating those boundaries in really clever ways and make us feel like we're the ones who are crazy because we're not getting this sort of response, healthy response that we normally would to our behaviors. Anyway, that's a whole other big topic. But my point is that she's learned, it's so cute because she started just saying this in our sessions. And I thought, that's kind of your mantra, isn't it now? Like that's your new refrain. And the statement that she kept saying, and it came out of her realization of her own boundaries and her own knowing what she's responsible for versus what she's not responsible for. That mantra or that refrain was, and that's on them. Okay. And that's on them. So she'd be relating a story to me and say how this situation happened and she had this reaction and they had this reaction, and how she realized in the past she would have taken responsibility for like their feelings or tried to do something to placate or to try to fix how they were feeling. And she started saying, nope, that's on them, or that's on her, that's on him, that's on them. In other words, that wasn't on her. In other words, that's not on me, that's on them. And I think that's an extremely important skill that we need to learn to develop, especially those of us who are change makers and feel very responsible for trying to make a difference and feeling very like we have this power, this ability, or this responsibility for making other people's lives better. It's a really important skill, though, to be able to separate and distinguish between what's on me, like what am I responsible for, what was my mistake, how did I show up in a way that maybe wasn't entirely helpful? What was my subconscious reaction, or what was triggering me? And to look at our part of the interaction and take responsibility for our part of that interaction. But then whatever we're not responsible for, then that's not on us. That's on them. Or maybe it's on someone else. But the point is, it's really important to develop that skill, that awareness, and then the choices that we make around that awareness that have to do with separating between what's on me, what am I responsible for, what do I actually have power over, what were the choices that I made in this interaction that may have resulted in certain things, or where I made a mistake or I misunderstood or what have you. So what is it that I need to take responsibility for versus what's on them? And what is, how did they choose to respond? How did they choose to perceive things that are not in my control, that are entirely in their control? And to discern again, and then to make choices from that moment. Because a lot of times, as I said, what we often end up unconsciously doing is thinking that we're responsible, and therefore we make choices for other people's behaviors or around other people's behaviors to think that maybe we need to make them feel differently than they do. And the reality is, how they feel is on them. If we have done something to cause them some kind of pain or to trigger, not to trigger, I shouldn't say that, or let's put it this way, if I say something to deliberately trigger you or to deliberately hurt you or to deliberately make you feel a certain way, then that's on me. That's on me, and I need to take responsibility for those behaviors, and I need to understand why I said those things or did those things. What was it that was maybe triggered inside of me, or what was the part of me that was causing me to behave that way? And so I can take responsibility, but then how they respond to that is on them. And that maybe their response is then let me just put it this way, that I'm responsible for that. But maybe if I said something and I genuinely didn't mean to offend, or I didn't know that was a trigger for them, I was really acting from good intentions, or then that's where good intentions can get kind of tough, because some people have good intentions and yet the results aren't so good. And so we also have to take responsibility for that. But my point is, it's about being aware of how we're showing up and why we're showing up in that way, and then taking responsibility for that, making amends, doing whatever we've got to do. But then recognizing that that the other stuff is belongs to the other person. So, and I should also say this too, that a lot of times this is really common in us women, and I know men can do it too, but especially with us women, we're oftentimes taught that other people's feelings are more important than our own, or we're taught that we have to be the peacekeepers, or that other people's, that we're responsible for basically how other people feel. And that unfortunately that we end up then taking on more responsibility and making choices around that than we really should. And it's exhausting. And it's not fair for ourselves. Last week I did an episode about self-care. It's not self-caring to make ourselves responsible for how other people feel if we didn't necessarily do something or cause something that caused to cause that level of reaction. I want to give another example that I had more recently as well with a friend, in which I did this and I looked at, what is, so this person got really, really upset about something, or actually about a lot of things. But the point is that when this person got really upset, it hurt. It hurt because they got really upset at me and they blasted me, even though I wasn't responsible for what someone else had done. I'm going to try to share the story without sharing too many details. But basically, I showed up for this event. I've been invited by this friend. And when I showed up, I could already see that she was upset. And so I said, "What's going on? Are you okay? Do you need to talk about it?" She said, "No, she didn't want to." Okay, that's fine. But I wanted her to know that I cared. And then what ended up happening was she left because she had to deal with something. But meanwhile, we were with all these other people who we didn't know, and because they'd all been invited by her. Anyway, a member of this group, we ended up going to a restaurant, and a member of that group, he showed up with his group of people, and then ordered a bunch of food, and then took off, disappeared. And so that left us with a food bill, a large food bill, for which we were not responsible. And on the one hand, we talked about, well, should we just pay for it? And then I wasn't the only one who said, no, I don't think that's okay. Even though like we could afford to pay for it, we didn't feel that that was really respectful of ourselves. And certainly what he'd done was not respectful of us. And whether he was aware of it, well, it's a long story. But anyway, the point is that we chose to send out a message to him on the group thread to have him pay for it. And what happened was, I realize I'm getting a little too much in the details, so I'm actually going to back off. But the point is that there were a series of events that happened. And then the next morning, this friend ended up getting really, really mad at me about the whole situation. And the point is, it really hurt to have her get mad at me because I was acting, with good faith. And I was also just trying to hold someone accountable for what they were responsible for, that we were not responsible for. And unfortunately, the way this other person handled it was not good. And unfortunately, everything ended up being atoned for at least that night, but I got blasted the next morning by this friend. And it really, really hurt. And so what I did was I did that parsing out. And I was like, okay, what part of this is mine? Because I felt pain and I thought, well, what, and I thought, what part of this is mine? And so there was a small part of it that I could see that she could be upset at me for. And from my perspective, it was based on a misunderstanding because we had all these like communication channels going. It was based on a misunderstanding. So once I kind of parsed it out and I was like, okay, I'm responsible for this part. So you know what? I need to apologize for this part. But then I was being blamed for all this other stuff. And I thought, am I responsible for that? no, I'm really not. Actually, this other person was responsible for that. Or like she was responsible for that. Or, or in the situation, she ended up taking on more responsibility than she needed to take on. Because frankly, it was like she was feeling like she had to do certain things that actually no one had actually asked her to do, but she had taken on as her responsibility. And unfortunately, instead, she ended up getting angry at me for that part. So I saw how it was this. So speaking of like what's mine, what's theirs, this was a big fat mess of this basically, where it's like certain people were responsible for their behaviors. Some people were not taking responsibility. Some people were taking too much responsibility. And then some people were blaming the wrong people for the mix up. And so it was just and then anyway, and so it was just a big mix up. And it was obviously more than just between two people. And so this was a great kind of moment to even practice this whole, like, what am I responsible for? What are other people responsible for? And so the way I handled it was I apologized for my part. I said, I'm really sorry that I didn't do this thing. I thought that this is the case, but I'm still going to apologize. I apologize for that. But then I said, here's where there's a misunderstanding. You were not expected to take responsibility for this. And I just want you to know that. And then I went further and I said, it sounds like last night was a really tough night for you, because I thought she was already in a lot of pain. So she was already probably triggered by stuff. And then the whole situation added on. So I wanted to show some compassion. And I just said, I'm really sorry. And I said, I am here, if you need to talk about any of this. It sounds like it was a really tough night in general. And then meanwhile, so handled it that way. But then also I had to take care of my own feelings. Because even though I could see, and I hope, by the way, that my telling you this helps you to kind of look at situations in your life where you can go, you know what? Yeah. I feel like I get blamed for things that aren't my fault. Or even though I can parse this out, you know what? It still hurts. And so this is all by way of saying that, like, so I sort of did that. I sort of handled what I knew was my part of it, and also extended my hand of support and compassion and said, I'm really sorry that was so upsetting, and I'm here to listen, even after she'd like blamed me for things. But I thought, well, we are all in pain. We all experience painful things. But then I had to take care of myself too, because even though I understood intellectually what was going on, and even though I was aware that it wasn't, anyway, even though I take responsibility, I still felt kicked in the gut. It's like, even though you can kind of understand the situation, the dynamics of the situation, there's still the emotional reaction. There's still the, because it's like an energetic attack even. And so I still felt hurt by that. And I also felt hurt because I felt like I've been wrongly accused. I felt like my positive intentions and my desire to connect with her had been rebuffed and instead turned into me not caring. And that was not fair, and that hurt. And that also, and this is another part of parsing it out, that also triggered some of my stuff, where I realized that some of my stuff had been triggered. And that actually part of my reaction and part of my pain was because of having a history of having been wrongly accused of things, or having had negative motivations projected onto me. And so I looked at that and I processed that, I drew some of it out. I talked to my husband about it because I just needed to vent it out. But then I felt like, okay. And I felt better. And again, looked at it. Did I take care of my part? Yes, I did. I took care of my part, and that's all I can do. And even though this person may still be mad at me, I really can't control that. I feel like I've done my part. Here's another thing that I want to add. I've actually had other friends since then who were involved in the whole situation ask how this person is doing. And I said, and I said she was really upset. And, but they were like, well, are you going to reach out to her again? And I said, no, I don't know if I will. And here's why. And maybe I will at some point, but here's why. Because this is another thing too, is how much energy do we want to put into a situation? Because if at some point, maybe we're putting too much energy into it, or going back into that, trying to bring that person back in or reconnect so that we can feel better. And I thought, no, you know what? I sort of put it out there. I left it in her hands, and she can choose how she wants to respond. So again, or not respond, and maybe she won't. But again, that's what we're talking about. What is mine and what is theirs and what is someone else's? and how these things can get really mixed up. And because of our emotional reactions to the situation, everyone's a little bit different, and we all have different layers of why and how we react. But because of everybody's reaction to the situation, it can be kind of hard to untangle, to disentangle that. But it's really important that we do, because it's super important when we recognize that maybe we're taking too much responsibility for that person's choices or that person's reactions. Or maybe we're not taking enough responsibility. Maybe we're reacting defensively like, oh, whatever, and it's their problem, when really, actually, some of it might be, we might be responsible for some of it. In that moment, when my friend got really angry at me, I could have been like, screw her, she doesn't get it. But instead, I thought, well, wait a minute. What part of it am I responsible for? And there was a small part that I could see. Again, it was not ill intention, but I could see how that upset her. So I take responsibility for it. But just because she's having this huge reaction doesn't mean that I need to react with the same amount of energy, or also need to take responsibility or need to take the blame for something that, even if she's blaming me for something, it doesn't mean it's my fault. My mom once taught me a really great statement. And that was, and I think she learned this in her work with child development, because she's a psychotherapist. I may have mentioned this before, that she said, just because someone's angry at you doesn't mean that you did anything wrong. So that's a great thing to remember. Just because someone's angry at you or upset at you doesn't mean you actually did anything wrong. Again, that can be a great statement to remind yourself of. And again, as you look at that and you consider that question in any situation, you could be like, well, actually, I didn't do this part wrong, or I showed up in not the greatest way in this part. So you know what, I do have this little bit to take responsibility for. Or to be like, you know what, they're absolutely right. I did screw up. It was my fault. And maybe I didn't mean it at the time, or I didn't realize it at the time, but now that I'm realizing it, yeah, I am responsible for that. Okay, so maybe you did do something wrong and they got angry at you for it. So that's important to recognize too. But a lot of times what we can tend to do is when someone's angry at us, we take on the responsibility of trying to make them feel better or calm them down, or maybe being defensive and saying, screw them. That's not, the case for me. And that's just us trying to protect ourselves in some way or another, usually based in childhood, sometimes based in traumatic experiences as adults. But it can often be because we're trying to take care of their feelings, we're trying to take care of our own feelings, or both. That by taking care of their feelings, we feel like we're protecting ourselves from getting hurt. So in that case, we're taking care of our feelings too. I realize I'm sort of like, it's all kind of tangled up, but that's how human relationships tend to be. But the best way that we can approach any sort of complicated situation like that is to take responsibility for what's ours and leave the rest to them, meaning that's on them if they have their part in it. So leave it up to them. And also, I want to say something really important is that we might see that they're reacting that way, especially those of us who are very empathic, those of us who are in the emotional healing space, like I obviously am. We can tend to want to analyze or try to understand from this deeper perspective. And then sometimes we even want to tell that person, I used to do this, tell that person, well, it sounds like, you must have this trigger or that trigger. You know what? If there's an intuitive sense that it would be helpful to bring in that information, then by all means do that. But if the person hasn't asked for it, then we might be actually violating a boundary. And also, it might be another way that we're trying to fix their feelings or trying to protect ourselves from how they're feeling, hoping that maybe they'll look at themselves and they'll do their inner work. But let me tell you something. It is not our job to do other people's inner work for them. It is not our job. And if we try to make it our job, we can often end up really disappointed, and we could end up with some backlash from them for trying to do what is ultimately their responsibility. So we may see stuff going on with them that they may not even be aware of, but it doesn't mean it's our job to heal them. It does not mean it's our job to fix them. It is only our job to listen to our own truth, figure out what's ours, let go of what's not ours, and then make choices accordingly from there. So I want to say that again. It is not your job to do other people's inner work for them. Their inner work is their job. It's their responsibility. They're responsible for their own inner selves, for their own inner worlds, for their own triggers, those blocks, etc. We can offer support or maybe resources if they're open, but it is not our job to do it for them. There have been times in my relationship, and like both my husband and I, we are very, we talk about our emotions all the time and we process stuff together and we help each other. But there have been a few times when like I've had a persistent reaction or he's had a persistent reaction, and we've hashed it out, maybe we argued about it. And then finally, like speaking for myself, finally I'll be like, sweetheart, you need to look at this. Like you need to do your own work on this because I can't help you with this. This is for you to look at and you to do your work. And so sometimes that's come from also me in my relationship with my wonderful husband, where we do process things where it's kind of like, wait a minute, I'm doing too much work here. This isn't my job. And I keep running into this situation. And meanwhile, he's not actually doing the work on himself to fix this problem, to fix this pattern, and vice versa. He said that to me. He's like, sweetheart, that's something that you need to work on. You need to look at why you keep having this reaction to this situation. And so we do that with each other, is we put it back on each other if we see that the other person isn't doing the work necessary to fix that pattern of behavior or that pattern in our relationship of interaction. So that's something that's important to do, especially with your closest relationships. And hopefully you have a partner who can do that with you. And if they don't, well, that's a whole other issue. Maybe you need to bring in a professional to help you with that, and to have the professional help you kind of disentangle who's doing this and who's doing that, or what's this person's perception and how is it affecting what's going on here. Speaking of which, I have a TV show recommendation for you, believe it or not. It's called Couples Therapy. It's on Showtime, and it's an actual couples therapist working with couples. And it's so cool because like I'm not a couples therapist, and my mother is, and I just totally admire anybody who's a couples therapist, frankly, because I could do whatever we need to do with the inner work. But when it comes to two people working with people together, wow, you're working with two different, bodies and beings who have their own sets of baggage and layers of stuff and triggers and everything. But anyway, I highly recommend the show Couples Therapy, because you can actually see how she starts to tease out or help them tease out so why did you react this way? And where does that come from? And notice how you actually reacted this way, or you're making her responsible or him responsible for this. Really fascinating to watch. So if you're into that kind of stuff, I highly recommend it. My husband and I actually kind of geek out on it. And it takes us, they're only half-hour episodes, but they take us like an hour to get through because we're constantly pausing to talk about what's going on. So anyway, I hope this has been helpful in really becoming more aware and developing a skill. It's an awareness and a skill to stop and go, hold on, what's mine and what do I need to take responsibility for? What do I have control over in terms of my part of things, and what's theirs? What is on them? What's their responsibility? To quote my delightful client who says, and that's on them. She's doing that because she's becoming so much more empowered within herself that now she can see it immediately. Nope, that's not my job. That's their job. And you know what? They can handle it. They're an adult. They have resources. They're intelligent people or what have you. They can handle that. That's for them to handle. I'm only responsible for my stuff. So use my client as inspiration, and maybe even my story as inspiration as you look at some of your conflicted relationships, or maybe you have sort of repeated conflicts in your life in which this keeps happening, or whenever you are having to deal with someone who's really behaving in a way that's just not conducive to good communication and good connection and safe connection. that, that may be helpful to come and look at it and go, wait a minute, how, where might I be taking on too much responsibility, or where might I be deflecting my responsibility just to try to protect myself and defend myself? So I hope this is helpful. As always, my name is Emily Eldridge with changelight.world, Change Light, Inner Work for Greater Good. Thank you so much as always. And I might see you next week. I might not. I'm going to be in Spain for a retreat. It's going to be for change makers, actually. It's going to be amazing. So I'm not sure yet. I might replay a show. But in any case, maybe I'll see you next week, or maybe I'll see you the week after. All right. Mwah. Talk to you again. Bye.